attempt to keep things moving here. We're going to go right into our keynote with Greg Lamberson. And Greg Lamberson is definitely someone you should know. And if you don't know him, you should definitely get to know him if you have any interest at all in movie making on any level. He's a prolific filmmaker. He's probably one of the most active filmmakers in the area. His resume is fantastic in terms of his accomplishments, not only as a filmmaker, but also as a writer. Just to give you an idea about Greg, he has directed 9 feature films to date. Most of those films he also was the writer for, and he's also published 15 books. So he's not only is he extremely creative, but he's just a phenomenally gifted artist on a number of different levels. Some of the films you may be familiar with are Johnny Gruesome, Guns of Eden, Killer Rack, and most recently just finished production of it's a comedy, which is a little bit out of your normal wheelhouse. It's called Unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. But he just wrapped up production. What's that?
Slime City Massacre.
Slime City Massacre, yeah. It's Slime City, too. So, I mean, the list really goes on. He's worked with a lot of just legendary figures in the horror movie industry. And he's probably worked with almost everybody in Western New York at one point or another who is involved in filmmaking. So at this time, I would like to welcome Greg Lamberson as our keynote speaker. Please give him a big hand.
Alrighty, I want to thank Bob for asking me to speak today. I've been part of this festival now for about 5 years. We had a break there for the pandemic. Last year, my friend Debbie Rashan gave an excellent speech, so try and live up to the bar she set. I can't help but think that all the other years that I've been on this stage, I've looked out in the audience and I have seen Bill Bryan, who is no longer with us, and I do miss seeing him today. Readers, by the way. Can everyone hear me clearly, by the way? Because this is a long speech and I want to make sure I'm crystal clear. We are the music makers and we are the dreamer of dreams. Willy Wonka spoke those words in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But Arthur O'Shaughnessy wrote them for his poem Ode. Proper credit is important. The late, great speculative fiction writer Harlan Ellison once said, "I'm a storyteller. If I have that on my precis when I go, storyteller, I'm satisfied with that." Harlan Ellison wrote several novels, almost 1,700 short stories, many television scripts, and a famous unproduced screenplay adaptation of Isaac Asimov's novel I, Robot. He is known for writing the science fiction novella A Boy and His Dog, which became a movie, and the classic Star Trek episode City on the Edge of Forever. He was also heavily involved in the 1970s Canadian sci-fi TV series The Star Lost, the 1980s version of The Twilight Zone, and Babylon 5 in the 1990s. He was famous for fighting for writers' rights, especially in Hollywood. And anytime a producer tampered with his words, he removed his name from the credits and substituted a pseudonym, Cordwainer Smith. He fought the good fight for creators. Film is the most collaborative art form there is, and generally requires the contributions of many storytellers, not just the one or two who reap the credit and rewards. I'm a storyteller, and many of you sitting here today are storytellers, or aspire to be storytellers. I'm also a New Yorker. I've lived in this state my entire life. 3 years in Cattaraugus, 3 in Dunkirk, 12 in Fredonia, 21 in New York City, and now 20 in Buffalo. For anyone counting on their fingers, that makes me 59. How many of you remember the first movie you ever saw in a theater? Let's hear what they are. Great one. Wait, which Planet of the Apes?
I don't know, first one.
Awesome. Kristen?
Jurassic Park.
Which one?
Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park. That's a good one.
1 million years we see.
Really, Terry?
Short and dry.
Very cool. I would have guessed it right. I saw a double feature of Walt Disney's Bambi and the Belgian film Pinocchio in Outer Space. I would have been 3 or 4 years old. My divorced mother and I lived alone in a walk-up apartment on Canary Street in Dunkirk, just a few blocks from the long-gone Regent Theater. She took me to see movies there, and on our walk home, we would stop at a cigar store where she bought me comic books. And I was too young to read, but I used to cut up the pictures in the comic books and the ads of the Aurora Monster model kits in the back pages. And I would stick those to the screen of my television set, because the cathode ray tube of old TVs, the static electricity would hold the paper to the screen so I could move them around and create my own cartoons. Don't try this now with your flat screen HD TV, it won't work. This was something of its time. It's a luxury that we had. I was a child of television at a time when television sets received good reception on 3 channels and intermittent reception on 3 others when the weather was nice. The choices were slim. Almost every show was appointment television, and every kid I knew watched the same episodes of the same TV shows repeatedly. My generation can quote Gilligan's Island, The Brady Bunch, and The Partridge Family endlessly, but my teenage daughter's generation barely knows these shows exist. I was initially a poor reader, which made me even more responsive to the images I saw in Saturday morning cartoons and weekday repeats on Channel 29 when it was cool, before Fox bought it. My mother didn't drive, and when we moved to Fredonia, I saw very few movies in the theater, but I was mesmerized by the movies I saw on Channel 7's Movie for a Sunday Afternoon. Tarzan Adventures, Don Knotts comedies, Ray Harryhausen fantasies. The Ghost in Mr. Chicken was as influential on me as Godzilla. Incidentally, The Ghost in Mr. Chicken was co-written by Everett Greenbaum, who was born and raised in Buffalo. Some of Greenbaum's other credits include such Don Knotts classics as The Reluctant Astronaut, The Shakiest Gun in the West, and episodes of The Odd Couple and MASH. So know your local history. As I grew older, I became obsessed with Hammer Films, Planet of the Apes, and Logan's Run. My uncle worked in the marketing and distribution arm of 20th Century Fox. They had a satellite office in Washington, D.C. And I would visit him in the summer, first in D.C. and later in New York City, and we would see a double feature every night. I would look forward to the summer year-round when I could go see these movies. And many of these were at the American Film Institute in Washington, D.C. I was probably the only 13-year-old living in Fredonia who had seen Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Slaughterhouse-Five, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show in the theater. Around 4th grade, I decided I would rather be a comic book artist than a policeman or an astronaut. A year or 2 later, my interest shifted to stop-motion animation because the movie bug had bitten me. I started drawing comic books or animating puppets as different means of telling imaginative stories. In 6th grade, Uncle Bill started mailing me advanced marketing materials for a movie called Star Wars, 6 months before anyone had heard of it. Looking at those glossy photos, I knew everything was about to change, and it did. George Lucas was a genius. He wrote a script, built worlds, and directed a film that utilized the imagination and talents of hundreds of other artists. That's when I knew I wanted to be a writer-director, to be the captain of a ship crewed by like-minded creatives. Those of us who immersed ourselves into the world of Star Wars minutiae back then became as familiar with concept artist Ralph McQuarrie, makeup artist Stuart Freeborn, and special effects artist John Dykstra as other kids became with football and baseball players. Film schools and film departments are common now, but they weren't so much so then. Because of Lucas, Spielberg, Coppola, and Scorsese, we learned about USC, UCLA, and NYU. And by the time I graduated from high school in 1982, film school brats were superstars, and film schools and programs popped up everywhere, a great money-making machine. It's a good thing for me that there was no film or media department in SUNY Fredonia at the time I lived in Fredonia, or any good options in Buffalo or Niagara Falls, because I was forced to choose between New York City or California as the geographic location of my short-lived film school education, and California was impractical. I'm a storyteller and a New Yorker. On the first day I attended the School of Visual Arts in New York City, my film theory instructor, a feminist activist named Joan Braderman, asked the 100 members of my class, "How many of you want to be directors?" 100 hands shot up. She said, "You won't all be directors. You can't be. That's impossible. But some of you will be. And some of you will find other ways to express yourself artistically through other positions in the film industry. Others will decide that film just isn't for them." To my knowledge, of those 100 film students, only 2 of us went on to direct feature films. Myself and James Muro, who would direct the gross-out horror film Street Trash before becoming one of the top Steadicam operators in Hollywood, an Oscar-nominated cinematography, and now a television director. Joan's warning seemed dire 41 years ago, but she was on the money for that time. Some of my classmates went on to become studio executives, art directors, and cinematographers. Others went into unrelated fields like marketing, advertising, and corporate management. Some made sacrifices to succeed in film. Others decided it more prudent to buckle down and pay off their student debt. I made the decision early on to stay on the East Coast, when those classmates of mine who built successful careers went west. I made the sacrifice but never found the brass ring. But I didn't give up. I've never given up. I've said before and I'll say it again, I am a model of perseverance. Today, as a new member of the Producers Guild of America, I modify that self-description. I'm a stubborn model of perseverance. You must be stubborn if you hope to make your living as a creator in the film industry. In 1982, professional films were shot on 35mm film. Semi-professional films were shot on 16mm. Some of them were blown up to 35mm. And amateurs worked in Super 8 film. Video was frowned on by everyone. It was a different medium back then. It was not as attractive as what it evolved into. Every one of those film formats cost money. 16mm film was cost prohibitive, and 35mm film was unimaginably expensive. You had to buy the negative stock, shoot it, take it to a lab to have it developed, strike a print of all the footage from the negative, physically cut your print. I had a big Steenbeck editing machine I rented. Cut the negative so that it matched the print that you made. There were little numbers along every strip of film, and those numbers corresponded to the negative. And you would hire a negative cutter to replicate the cuts that you made under print with a negative. And then from the negative, you would print your first print of the film, which would be a silent print of the finished film. And it would be untimed, uncolor corrected. Then you would have to find a way to get a sound on there, and then you would color correct it, and then you would strike another print, all going through a professional laboratory. So this was extremely expensive. My first feature, shot in 16mm in 1986, cost $50,000. We were only able to shoot 2 takes of every shot, and even then only when necessary. If the actor flubbed the line, okay, you get a second shot. If they flubbed it again, you chose between which of the lesser of 2 evils you could live with. So if you watch a low-budget film, shot in film back in that period, and the acting seems, let's say, questionable, try to understand that those were the circumstances we were living under. Digital technology has revolutionized the industry and leveled the playing field. Anyone who wants to make a feature film can, as long as they have the fortitude and basic resources. I know plenty of filmmakers across the country who write, direct, shoot, and edit their own films. If you can do all those things and fill all those positions yourself, and don't need to pay someone else to do them, you can make a quality film for about $6,000. I've screened films at Buffalo Dreams Fantastic Film Festival that cost that little. Good films that receive distribution. Quality films. If that's the route you choose to take, you'll probably make a few stinkers before you make a good one. You'll make mistakes and learn from them. That's what it's all about. That's also why learning your craft, making shorts, is a good idea. If 100 people were in this auditorium right now, and by the way, this is the best turnout I've seen in the auditorium in several years. Thank you for attending. And I asked 100 of them who wanted to be directors, and 100 hands went up, just like they did when I went to college in 1982. I would say not all of you can make a living as directors, but it's now possible that all of you can direct a feature film, if that's what you put your mind to. Art and commerce are two totally different beasts, obviously. Filmmaking is a craft that sometimes aspires to be art, and sometimes achieves that goal. Some people make films purely as art, with no commercial expectations or considerations. That's not the way I work. I want my films to be seen by an audience, so I try to make them commercial even within my warped sensibilities, my unique perspectives. Do you want to be a film creator, or do you want to make a living working on other people's films? These options are not mutually exclusive. Fred Vogel is an independent filmmaker in Pittsburgh, well known. He and his wife Shelby have a production company, Toe Tag Productions, through which they make and self-distribute graphic independent horror films. They are total filmmakers, developing, producing, and selling their own work. No middlemen are involved. What many people don't know, and Fred has a cult following, is that for years he's also worked as a set decorator on bigger films and TV shows, and recently joined a union for that department. So he enjoys the benefits of both worlds. One supports the other, and while he will continue making his crazy horror films, at the end of his career, he will be able to retire with a pension, which is something I can't say. The auteur theory posits that a director is the author of a film. You may subscribe to this theory or you may not. I will say, a screenplay is the foundation of every good film. A creative producer assembles the best team for a project. The production designer preconceives the look. The cinematographer sets the visual tone. Makeup artists and costume designers make invaluable contributions. The cinematographer will work in concert with the director and the production designer, and the gaffer will work with the cinematographer. We all see that title, gaffer, at the end of every movie. A gaffer does the lighting. He works closely with the cinematographer to achieve the mood of a film. Just like the makeup artist and the costume designer, the gaffer tells a story his own way. These people may answer to a director or to a powerful producer with veto power, but they are storytellers in their own right. The list goes on and on. Camera operators, art directors, second unit directors, stunt choreographers, all of these people are storytellers. The auteur theory may be correct in some cases. Look at Chaplin, Hitchcock, Scorsese, and Kubrick, but more often it is not. It is a very collaborative medium. I've directed 9 features, and not once have I taken the credit, a film by Gregory Lamberson. My personal philosophy is that film is a collaborative medium and audiences are sophisticated. If a viewer sees I wrote, directed, and co-produced a film, he probably understands that I'm the driving force behind that production without me giving myself a giant possessory credit. I don't need to take away from other people's hard work to feed my own ego. How much glory does one person need on one little low-budget film that not that many people are going to see anyway? I've written a dozen novels, 2 novellas, and dozens of screenplays, many of which I've produced and directed myself. I've also written screenplays for others, directed someone else's screenplay, and adapted someone else's book as both a screenplay and a film. If someone else wrote a screenplay I directed, or a source novel I adapted, how can I call myself the author of the resulting film? As I said, there are exceptions. Would someone deny John Carpenter's possessive credits on films he directed but didn't write? Of course not, but he's a master. Very few people are masters in any field. All narrative filmmakers are storytellers. Over the years, I've given a lot of people their first film job, the first taste of what it means to be on a feature film set, even a low-budget one. I enjoy mentoring young people who want advice and who are more likely to follow that advice than older people who are set in their ways, people who have already learned to be stubborn. I recently met a high school student on a film set. She asked me how to go about making her own films. I told her, find a few people you can depend on and just make it happen. Don't wait for anyone to give you a break. Don't depend on others, don't wait for others. You have to do it yourself. My first job on a feature film was on a horror comedy called I Was a Teenage Zombie, which is part of the Criterion Collection, which you can watch right now on HBO Max. I was working as a manager at a movie theater in Times Square and was introduced to a man named John Michaels, who had been the assistant director on a low-budget horror film called Splatter University. I had paid to see the film at another theater just a few blocks away, so we had something to discuss, a connection. John told me he was getting ready to direct his own first feature. I had already written my first screenplay, but didn't know the first thing about producing it, and knew I had to work on someone else's film to learn the nuts and bolts of filmmaking in a way the film school could never teach me. I didn't wait for John to ask me to work on the film. I asked him. The conversation went like this. Can I work on it? It doesn't pay anything. You'd have to work for free. I don't care. Can I work on it? It's a full-time job and we're shooting for a whole month. You can't just show up when it's convenient for you. You have to be available every day. I don't care. I'll quit my job. Can I work on it? I saw the opportunity and I went for it. He invited me to a production meeting in a crappy Brooklyn apartment, and after too many beers asked me to be the production manager on the film. I didn't know what a production manager did on a film set, but I didn't tell him that. I saw the opportunity and I seized it. I quit my job and I learned as much about making a movie during that month as I did during a full year at film school. I believe that working for free on a feature film provides invaluable set experience and networking opportunity for novices, as long as the people in charge know what they're doing and hire professional crew members who will remember you for future projects. Making contacts is critical. And if the people making the film don't know what they're doing, you'll learn from their mistakes. Either way, it's a win-win situation. I would have paid for the opportunity to work on I Was a Teenage Zombie. That's how badly I wanted to get my foot in the door. On my first film, Slime City, working with the production designer and the special makeup artist opened my eyes to the fact that craftspeople in other departments are storytellers too. They have to satisfy the director's vision and sometimes dance around it, but they bring their own ideas to the table. We are all storytellers. In the most famous scene in the 1960 film Spartacus, a Roman general hoping to execute the slave Spartacus demands that Spartacus identify himself. As Spartacus is about to do so, each of his fellow slaves beats him to the punch and declares, "I am Spartacus." Howard Fast wrote the novel Spartacus was based on. Kirk Douglas purchased the rights to the book and served as executive producer and starred in it. As the executive producer, Kirk Douglas hired screenwriter Dalton Trumbo to adapt Fast's novel. There is a movie called Trumbo starring Bryan Cranston, which you should track down if you haven't seen it. Even though Trumbo had been blacklisted for refusing to name names to Joseph McCarthy's House Un-American Activities Committee. Trumbo intended to use a pseudonym on the script, but Douglas insisted he use his real name. This was the beginning of the end of the Hollywood blacklist. John F. Kennedy crossed a picket line just to watch the finished film, effectively ending the blacklist for good. So the movie Spartacus played a role in U.S. history, a noteworthy achievement. Kirk Douglas hired Anthony Mann to direct Dalton Trumbo's screenplay based on Howard Fast's novel. After 1 week of shooting, Douglas fired Mann and hired Stanley Kubrick to take over directing. Who do you think is remembered as the creator of the film? The Writers Guild of America, also known as WGA, is now on strike against the Alliance of Motion Picture Television Producers, known as AMPTP. It's even a bad guy's acronym, which represents studios and streamers like Netflix. WGA represents and protects professional screenwriters and television writers. WGA is actually two organizations with a common purpose: the Writers Guild of America East and the Writers Guild of America West. Both were formed in 1954. According to WGA, screenwriters and television writers now earn less than they did 10 years ago because of deals struck by the streamers which deny royalties to writers, directors, and stars. When a television show is syndicated, the television station can report, we showed this episode this many times, and that's how royalties are calculated. But on a streamer, where people watch things whenever they want, those figures are not transparent, and they're also not publicized, and they're kept very secret. That's the whole business model of the Netflix empire, and they don't pay royalties. So the WGA is really fighting on behalf of the rights of guild and union members throughout the industry. Their cause will result in greater transparency for a business model currently based on secrecy. While WGA is striking, no new scripts can be written for union movies or TV series. This is a battle between creative talent and corporations, and its outcome will shape the film industry for years to come. The WGA has gone on strike 5 times before. Every strike by the WGA, or by the Directors Guild of America, which is the DGA, or by the Screen Actors Guild, which is SAG, leads to a destruction of film and TV production. Economic pressure is what brings big money to the table. Now the DGA, SAG, the Teamsters, and IATSE, which is a union that most of our local crew people belong to, Local 52, all stand in solidarity with WGA. And there's been a lot of talk about how the writer's strike is going to affect what we see and what productions come to town, but I will tell you that the DGA, the Directors Guild, begins its own contract negotiations with the AMPTP on Wednesday. And SAG-AFTRA begins its negotiations on June 7th. So it's possible, even likely, that we'll see all 3 major creative guilds in a 3-way strike, the likes of which Hollywood has never seen. And the Teamsters and IATSE, who are the truck drivers and the general crew people, they negotiate new contracts next year. So they all see what the streamers have been doing them, how they're trying to underpay them, and they're all banding together. So this will be a protracted strike, or it will be over very fast. As consumers, we'll be affected by a lack of entertainment product. Expect a lot of new reality TV shows. As crew people, we face a dearth of even more jobs. And I'll just add to some of the things that were discussed by the panelists for reasons why there's been a production slowdown. The greatest reason is a change in the New York State Film Production Tax Credit, which was 30% when we were doing well. They lowered it to 25% to answer critics. At the same time, it went up in other states, and guess what? All the productions went to the other states, and that's why film stopped coming here. Now, Hopeful has upped it to 30% again, and if not for these strikes, we would see a change in the production coming to town fairly soon. These strikes are going to have a different effect. As independent filmmakers, we're given a rare opportunity to create product at a time when the thirst for product will be high. The challenge, as always, is to produce something of quality with limited resources. So step up if you will, but come correct. Your scripts must be on point. Your direction must rise above amateurish basics. Your acting must be engaging, and your production value must meet the bar. Anytime there's talk of a writer's strike or a lawsuit filed by a screenwriter or television writer over copyright infringement or cheated royalties, I think back on Harlan Ellison, the storyteller I mentioned at the beginning of this speech. Back in the 1970s, Harlan sued ABC TV and Paramount Pictures because a TV series called Future Cop, about an android police officer, bore a resemblance to a short story he co-wrote with Ben Bova called Brillo. He and Bova won over $300,000 in the lawsuit, and Harlan used his share of the winnings to rent a billboard in the Hollywood Hills on which he posted, "I beat the bastards." And he used all the money until it ran out so that everybody saw that sign. Later, he sued James Cameron and Hemdale Pictures over The Terminator, after Cameron admitted in an interview that his screenplay had been influenced by one of Harlan's scripts on the TV series The Outer Limits. Hemdale settled the case, agreeing to acknowledge Ellison's work in the credits. And if you watch any Terminator movie, TV series, spin-off, game, whatever, Harlan Ellison gets his credit. Harlan was a gadfly who stood up to power. His most famous quote is, "Pay the writer." Story is king in the film industry because story means content. There is no narrative film without story, and yet writers are notoriously mistreated in a business where directors are worshipped as golden gods. The WGA is striking for more than royalties. This is the first anti-artificial intelligence strike. It won't be the last. Screenwriters want to stop AI from taking their jobs, but the studios want to see what AI can do. According to CBS News, the WGA is calling for a near total ban on the use of AI to produce or even contribute to written entertainment. The great Paul Schrader, legendary screenwriter of Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, sees it differently. Posting on Facebook, "It's apparent that AI will become a force in film entertainment. Do you need a new episode of CSI Vegas? GPT will deliver that in a matter of seconds. And it will be good. It will call all the episodes of CSI for the last 20 years and come up with something both generic and contemporary. Writers will be the first users of AI, not studios. Here's my AI-enhanced episode of your series, which I swear I wrote by myself." This, I think, is the WGA position. If a WGA member employs AI, she should be paid as a writer. If a producer uses AI to create a script, they must find a WGA writer to pay, end quote. It's an interesting conundrum. Most of the WGA's talking and walking points do not affect you or I as creators, only as consumers. But the use of AI will not be limited to big budget, mainstream Hollywood union productions. Just the opposite. As I speak, indie filmmakers possessing more ambition than talent are feeding unoriginal and underdeveloped screenplay points into GPT and waiting for them to be regurgitated as something comprehensible. The lack of talent, which has served as a guardrail to protect the public from delusional egomaniacs, will be removed, and those egos will run rampant and unchecked, like the monster from the Id and Forbidden Planet, representing AI enhancements as their own creations. Some will not only confess to their sins, they will openly brag about them, portraying themselves as innovators. In Harlan Ellison's classic short story, "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream," a sentient computer which has wiped out mankind to end a war keeps 4 human beings alive to torture them for its own amusement. In Ellison's scenario, AI not only creates entertainment, it craves it at our expense. In the Terminator films, AI uses robots to wipe out mankind. What Ellison, Cameron, and other creative colleagues have failed to envision is a future in which AI doesn't seek to end or enslave mankind. AI, with the same egomaniacal impulses as frustrated wannabes, may well preserve mankind with the sole purpose of having an eager and adoring audience for its entertainment creations. We are all storytellers, including machines now. The WGA may be able to put the brakes on big studios employing AI, for now, maybe. But there are no such roadblocks for the wannabes in our midst. AI represents the true democratization of film, and it will change everything. Why learn the craft of screenwriting and develop original ideas and skills and talent as a writer when anyone with a few cliched ideas can join forces with the machine and produce a finished screenplay that reads like a big studio blockbuster? Imagine the most insecure person you know suddenly gifted with immeasurable artificial talent. This is where the real storytellers enter the picture. We must tell our own stories with our own viewpoints in our own voices. The words on the computer screen must represent our own thoughts, dreams, and fantasies. Now more than ever, when what we wish to convey as artists matters. Now more than ever, what we offer as independent filmmakers matters. Now more than ever, how we support art matters. It may sound like science fiction when I tell you to support human artists and human-created art, but this is the precipice at which we find ourselves. I've seen numerous writer friends, authors, screenwriters, share their chat GPT experiments on social media, usually for comedic effect. Sure, it's funny now. Next month it may not be. That's how quickly things are evolving. So I'm asking you all to make a pledge to be true to yourself in your writing by avoiding the use of AI in your work. Do not collaborate with Skynet. And I'm asking you as consumers to avoid supporting AI-generated art, even when it seems novel. We have to write our own future as artists and as people. Human writers still have one hope against the great machine. What it really wants to do is direct. Printed that on, right, Bob? 30 minutes left. Voila.
It looks like a screenplay, but it's only larger.
Okay, so what we have left today is the award ceremony, and what I'd like to do is just give everyone an opportunity to take a 5-minute break. If you want to get some sunshine, some air, something to drink. There might still be some food out there as well. And then we'll meet back here at 1:45 for the awards.